So we've talked about this idea of balance of power as the rule book that sort of drives how the international system operates, but that rule book changes depending on the polarity of the international system. So we probably should talk a little bit about what polarity is and some of the different patterns that we see. So when we're thinking about the polarity of the system, really all we're talking about is the number of powerful actors, sometimes called power poles. Oftentimes we just say states because oftentimes when we're thinking about powerful actors, we're thinking about states. But technically, a power pole could be an alliance of states that are tightly tied together. It could be an international organization. Potentially, the European Union could function as a power pole. And polarity, the number of these actors, is really foundational for almost everything that happens in the international system, and is really important to understand. But we also need to think about polarity in terms of regional dynamics, because when we're thinking about powerful actors, that really just means that they're able to project power and push power out beyond their own borders. And certainly within a region, you might have a number of different powerful actors who are able to project power within that region. But that doesn't mean that they're able to act in different regions. In fact, states are able to act in multiple different regions and affect the global balance of power, are sometimes called great powers. And then when we think about what makes a superpower different from a great power, a superpower isn't just able to operate in their home region and one or maybe two additional regions. A superpower is able to act globally in all different regions. And so because you have regional powers and great powers and potentially one or more superpowers, the polarity that exists globally might look different than the polarity that exists within a single region, and region to region might look very different. And so when I'm thinking about polarity, or I'm talking about polarity, I'm largely talking about what's happening globally, but it's worth recognizing that within different regions, there might be different patterns going on. And the pattern in the Middle East, where you might have Iran and Saudi Arabia and Egypt and Israel and the United States and Russia, all and France and Britain, all operating within that region, might look very different than the North American region, where it's primarily just the United States as the powerful state, and Canada and Mexico aren't really trying to balance or check the United States in any meaningful way. We can have subsystems. We can have also, this is a very messy map by Weaver and Bozan, but I think it's worth thinking about sort of how different regions interact, and what the polarity in those different regions look like. I'm not necessarily going to dig into the map much beyond simply throwing it up, and you can take a look at it, and if you want to track down the book, I can certainly throw a link in there. But recognizing the regional polarity might look different than global polarity is important. So when we're thinking about polarity, we'll just start counting up. Unipolarity, a unipolar system has one powerful actor. Is the prefix for one, right? A unicycle. That might be a single dominant state, or it might be some sort of organization that has dominance. Like typically, I would describe the European system under the Holy Roman Empire and the Roman Catholic Church of sort of the Christendom era as probably being a unipolar system, arguably. The last 30 years or so since the fall of the Soviet Union, the United States has functioned as the single dominant state in the international system. It's been a unipolar system. And typically when we get unipolar systems, that dominant state will seek to direct and control and manage the system, and will seek to prevent subordinate states from breaking free. And so during that period of unipolarity, the United States focused a lot on questions of rogue states. These are states that are not playing by the set of rules that the United States have been trying to sort of map onto the international system. There was a lot of focus on terrorist groups, and that tends to be where your focus goes. It's on these smaller threats that are maybe trying to break free. If I'm thinking about the likelihood of major war, I would probably classify it as unlikely in a unipolar system, not because there's not resistance, not because there's not war fighting. The United States from 1991 to 2020 was engaged in warfare almost every single year, but it wasn't great power war. It wasn't a World War II, World War I kind of struggle. It was smaller scale wars. And that seems to be almost a tautological function of unipolarity, that there aren't other states that are in a position to functionally challenge the dominant state in a unipolar system. In a bipolar system, you get two powerful states, and that oftentimes produces a rivalry, because as those two powerful states are sort of scanning the international system looking for possible threats, they diagnose and dismiss correctly that the vast majority of states aren't going to threaten them or can't threaten them, and then they encounter that other powerful actor and think to themselves, my goodness, if anybody is going to threaten me at all, potentially it's going to be that other actor, and so I'm going to monitor them. And maybe, I don't have any hostile intentions at first, but something's going to come along, and at some point, your adversary is going to form an alliance or a new partnership with a smaller state, and you're going to panic and think, oh my goodness, they're building up their sphere of influence, they're gathering these smaller states to themselves. Suddenly I'm going to be, left out, a pariah in the system. And so typically what we get within a bipolar system, two powerful states, is that those powerful states try to assert spheres of influence, to try to bring states into their alliance or sphere of influence, and steal them away from that other state, which ends up creating sort of a rivalry behavior between these two countries. In the past, when we've seen bipolar systems, they have been very war prone. Rome and Carthage would be a great example, where Rome and Carthage fought, and then after Rome won, the Roman political system sort of revisited it and decided that it wanted to go back and fight again. And after Carthage was defeated again, Hannibal marches his forces across and the center of Europe and down into the Italian peninsula, and rampages for a decade in an attempt to just sow as much destruction as possible. That kind of all-out war to the death seems to be typical of a bipolar system. Britain and France fought repeated conflicts in the 18th century as they were struggling for dominance. And the Cold War period from 1945 to 1971 to 1991, depending on how you count, seemed to have some of that as well. But both the United States and the Soviet Union shied away from an out-and-out direct military confrontation, preferring to fight proxy wars in a more or less nonstop conflict throughout that period, but holding back partly because of nuclear weapons. That's what you sometimes call nuclear restraint, but the rivalry, the pressure that comes with a bipolar system ends up being really intense. When we think about a tripolar system, now we're up to three powerful actors in the international system. Typically what we see is one of two patterns. Either you'll get maybe a détente kind of pattern, a kind of friendship sort of pattern developing amongst the other the three power poles, because they're doing a calculation that says the most important thing for me to ensure my survival is to not have the other two power poles gang up against me, because if they both turn on me simultaneously, I'm toast. So I need to make sure I have functional and good relations with both of those other states, and if possible, I will try to sow a little bit of distrust, discord amongst them, so that they don't align and turn on me. That's one potential pattern we can see in a tripolar system, and when that happens, I would say the likelihood of a great power war is fairly low, because these states are trying to maintain these positive relations. There was a period of I don't want to say warming in the Cold War, but I'll say warming in the 1970s that was oftentimes described as an era of détente, when the United States was trying to maintain these better relations with the Soviet Union and with China, and China was trying to maintain a distance from the Soviet Union and improve relations with the United States. So that dynamic can work, but it's not guaranteed to hold. It is possible in a tripolar system that two of the powers will simply align and turn on the third power. I think one interpretation of World War II would be that there was a Anglo bloc, the United States and Britain, I guess France as well, an allied bloc maybe will go. There was a communist bloc in the Soviet Union, and then there was the fascist bloc of Italy, Germany, and Japan, and World War II really kicks off in earnest when the fascist bloc and the communist bloc align to carve up Eastern Europe. So that can happen too. And when the system does collapse into those different alignments, you can get war springing forward from that as the system kind of shifts out of balance. In a multipolar system, that's less likely to happen because you have lots and lots of powerful actors. And so this is your classic balance of power kind of system where states are trying to prevent any bloc from becoming dominant. Alliances are reshuffling. In theory, they're able to reshuffle in such a way that major war becomes very unlikely because no alliance or no bloc of states is able to get such an overwhelming position of dominance that it would think that it could possibly try to take over the international system, that it would desire to fight a major war against a rival bloc. And something about alliance blocks also seems to rein in the aggressive behavior of states, that you might be a member of an alliance bloc that's maybe has a slight advantage, but that doesn't mean that if you initiate a conflict, that the other members of your alliance are going to stand by you and go to war for your particular conflict, where they might be willing to back you up if you were the victim of being attacked. So there's the thinking that the multipolar systems tend to be fairly stable. Certainly the 1700s through the start of the 20th century within Europe is oftentimes pointed to as a classic balance of power multipolar system. Some people would argue that we are entering or have entered a multipolar world order where the United States and the European Union and Russia and China and India and Brazil and others are all different power poles in the system that are trying to figure out how to balance and align in such a way that no one is in an overwhelmingly dominant position. I'm expecting that, over the course of the 21st century, that pattern will probably accelerate somewhat.